collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, some of our highly threatened bird species are falling foul of our efforts for renewable energy.
Vultures come to mind in Cyprus in particular because they're such a threatened species here, but not just vultures, lots of other birds of prey, things like storks, cranes, lots of different species, unfortunately, are likely to collide with the turning blade.
And if you felt starved of entertainment over the last 5 or 6 months, fear not. The Kypria Festival is bringing theatre and other entertainment to somewhere near you in the coming month.
We perform mostly in Nicosia and in Limassol, but also in Larnaca and Arabiku.
Well, I think we all know that renewable energy is probably the future. We've not been very good at it in Cyprus as a rule. We do have a lot of solar panels, but of course the new thing is wind power. What does that mean? It means those huge windmills that we're now seeing dotted around the countryside. The downside is that they are a danger to birds. Joining us to talk about the latest problems is the Director of BirdLife Cyprus, Martin Helikar. Martin, I read an article in the Cyprus Mail recently about the fact that a fair number of particularly large birds tend to fall foul of these windmills, but there are some answers as to what can be done. I think some studies have been done, so can you bring us up to speed?
Yes, indeed. I mean, as you say, these wind turbines, windmills, are unfortunately a serious collision risk for birds, especially for large birds, such as, well, vultures come to mind in Cyprus in particular because they're such a threatened species here, but not just vultures, lots of other birds of prey, things like storks, cranes, lots of different species, unfortunately, are likely to collide with the turning blade. It's also true, by the way, that these turbines can have a serious impact on bats. So it's not just birds, it's wildlife more generally. The key thing seems to be where you place these windmills, where you place the wind farms. So the important thing is not to place them where you have important numbers of these species that are at risk, not to place them in migration corridors for birds, not to place them in key breeding and feeding areas for species like the griffon vulture in Cyprus.
I would imagine, though, that obviously they are going to put them where they think there is the most wind. So are environmental impact assessments carried out before they're placed to see, A, whether they will be working efficiently because there is enough wind, but B, that they won't have that impact on the biodiversity?
Yeah, good question. So the companies that put up these wind turbines, they certainly do their research ahead of time by putting up small measuring stations to see that there is enough wind, as you say. And then, yes, according to the law, there needs to be an impact assessment, or if the proposed area for a wind farm development is within a site protected for nature, so, for example, a Natura 2000 site in Cyprus and elsewhere in Europe, then there needs to be an even more in-depth process for assessing and ensuring that there isn't going to be a significant impact on birds or other wildlife. Unfortunately, in the case of Cyprus, these rules have not always been adhered to. We haven't always observed these very carefully, so we've ended up with, well, I think the most obvious example is the biggest wind farm in Cyprus at Orites. It's visible from the highway when one travels from Limassol to Paphos. That was sited in the middle of a Natura 2000 site that's very important for the vulture, but also other birds of prey.
How can that possibly have happened?
The assessment wasn't carried out properly, but the license was still given. It's something that the European Commission has taken up with Cyprus and has asked for further studies and further mitigation measures, but that has all moved very slowly. From the perspective of a bird like Cyprus, we would have liked, the government departments to be much stricter on this, not to have submitted in the first place. And secondly, we would like the government departments to respond much more proactively to the pressure from Europe. And I would add, actually, we would like much stronger positions to be taken up by the Commission. But there are things you can do, even in an existing wind farm. So there's some recent research that suggests that if you paint one of the blades of these windmills dark black, or a dark colour anyway, then it becomes that much more visible to flying birds and reduces the collision risk. I think the suggestion was by up to 70%. I mean, it's only one study. I think the study was somewhere in Scandinavia. It doesn't necessarily mean that's transferable to everywhere. But, we need to be looking at these solutions, and we need to be citing renewable energy installations correctly, because, as you said in your introduction, we need renewable energy. It's the way forward. We can't go on burning fossil fuels.
Right, can I just ask you, as a bird expert, why it would be that painting something a dark colour would mean the birds could see it? Is that to do with the way they see things, their eyesight?
Yeah, I mean, basically, these birds, so if you're a vulture, you're cruising around in that lovely sort of effortless way they have, and what you're focused on is the ground, because you're looking for a dead goat or a dead donkey to clean up. What you're not doing is looking ahead. And apparently these whirring blades just don't register as a solid object to the birds. That's what the research seems to show. But if the blades are darker, then it's much more likely that they will register them as a solid object and therefore veer away from them.
So why aren't all turbines painted black?
That's a good question. I mean, it doesn't seem like it even needs to be all of them. It can be one blade, and that still makes a huge difference. There are solutions. Obviously, it costs a little bit to paint a blade black. It's that much harder if the windmill is in place, isn't it? But, it's a matter of economics. I mean, I think it boils down to the companies won't do this unless they're forced to do it by a relevant department.
Or perhaps in the future, the people who make the turbines just make them in black.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's easier to do that before you've actually put it in place. And we certainly need to make sure that going forward, no renewables, whether that's windmills or, in fact, even photovoltaic panels, are placed badly, are placed in really sensitive areas. And secondly, we need to take advantage of all the latest technology to prevent collision risk. Even for photovoltaic panels, the newer ones are not as reflective, so you don't have this risk that birds, when you've got a large photovoltaic park, they can mistake that for a body of water and actually go and collide in effort to land on the water. But the newer panels, which are a less reflective surface, seem to a large extent, get around that problem. So often there are solutions, but you need the pressure from the lawmaker and the implementer of those laws to make sure that they are put in place, because there's usually a slight increase in cost involved in implementing those solutions.
And we all know that, unfortunately, the authorities here don't seem to have these issues at the top of their agenda. Let's talk a little bit about the number of birds that are killed in Cyprus. I suppose it's really, really difficult to measure that, but do you have any indication?
The honest answer is really that we don't, for the reason that you just mentioned. It's very difficult to measure it. So in the Orites wind farm, there is a monitoring program in place, but the monitoring is not being done by an independent body. It's being done by the company that runs the wind farm. Now, I'm not saying that they're fudging figures or anything. What I am saying is that it's very difficult to find a dead bird that is the victim of a collision, because the foxes in the area will be much more efficient at finding it than most any researcher. So to set up a program that will actually give you an accurate indication of what the kill rate is, you need a very specific, very carefully targeted program. We've asked a number of times to be shown what they're doing, to be shown the haven't seen it. So as a result, we don't have a clear picture. What we do know is from studies all across the world that, which is where we came in, that this is a serious risk and can have significant impacts on populations of quite rare birds such as vultures. And I mean, we're in the middle of a EU-funded LIFE project to try and save the vulture, which may even involve bringing vultures from Spain to boost our dwindling population. Well, we can't have the EU sinking money in that at one end and then have wind farms at the other end wiping out the vultures. So we need to get that balance right.
And what role should our Minister of Agriculture be playing in this? He is, after all, the Minister of Agriculture, Natural Resources and the Environment, and has seemed fairly switched on and sympathetic to ecological arguments, but we haven't seen much in this area.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to make it about one minister or one person. It's about the department working with organisations like Cyprus to implement solutions where they exist. I mean, for example, in the case of photovoltaic plants, the key missing ingredient in the whole effort to increase photovoltaics, which we agree with and support, is an island-wide plan for where you can and cannot put in these photovoltaic plants. So there's all sorts of applications coming up everywhere, and there's all sorts of photovoltaic plants popping up everywhere across the countryside without a good agreed plan for this. I mean, you would need to start logically from what you might call dead surfaces. So all the roofs of industrial complexes and government departments, give greater incentives for people to put panels on their own roofs at home. Once you've done that, and you still need more, and you probably do, to reach the targets, because we really need to reduce emissions, don't we? Well, then, okay, some in the countryside, but it should be done with very clear criteria. What you don't want to do is tackle the emissions issue while undermining ecosystems, because it's all part of the same equation at the end of the day. And there's no point just limiting emissions if we're undermining the capacity of the planet to respond to climate change, which is happening whatever we do in terms of emissions.
Yeah, and biodiversity tends to get lost a little bit in the importance in the climate change argument. So I would suggest that, in actual fact, one of the ways forward, you mentioned it in passing, but it had sprung to mind, hence my last question, was that if every household had a couple of photovoltaic panels on their homes, enough to provide their own electricity, the demand island-wide for electricity to be provided by others would fall dramatically, surely.
Exactly. I mean, we need to start from available surfaces, because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Surfaces where you can put a photovoltaic panel. Available surfaces that are not part of any ecosystem. They're not absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere because they've got vegetation on them, to put it very simply. So those are what I would call dead surfaces. Let's cover those in photovoltaic panels. There's now technology that allows you to actually convert a road surface into a photovoltaic panel. We could turn our highways, of which we have a lot in Cyprus, into photovoltaic surfaces, creating clean energy. Let's do that first, and then let's look at what else we might need to sacrifice in order to reduce our emissions. But let's always keep in mind that the world is a living system, and you're not helping it if you're reducing emissions at one end of the equation, but undermining nature and biodiversity at the other end of the equation. So, we need to have a balanced approach to this, and we need to keep biodiversity in mind.
A very, very quick last question, Martin. We spoke before, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, about the Vultures programme as part of the European LIFE programme. How are we doing? What's the current situation?
So we're still in the first year of the programme. So we're still laying the groundwork, if you like, before we actually move to bringing in some vultures from Spain, which is pretty much the only member state of the EU that still has good vulture populations, to boost our population, because our population is so low that the experts tell us it can't recover on its own. But before we do that, we need to tackle a very serious threat for the vultures, which is that of illegal poisoning. So there's too much poison being put out in our countryside. The vultures are unfortunately too efficient at finding poisoned carcasses. And, you know, one incident with one big carcass could potentially wipe out our whole vulture population as things stand. So we're working with the departments to try and put mechanisms in place, to try and raise awareness, to try and secure a first conviction for illegal placement of poisoning by whoever that might be. And unfortunately, there's too many people who are doing it often without realizing what the full ecological impacts of that are. So that we can change that equation, we can change that dynamic, and it becomes that little bit less likely the vultures get poisoned, and then we can hope that we can bring in the vultures, boost our population, and get them back onto the road to recovery, because they provide this amazing ecosystem service, which is keeping our environments, you know, free of rotting animals and free of disease. Apart from the fact that they're fantastic birds and we really want to have them in our skies.
It would be terrible if they disappeared completely. But I presume as well that legislation as regards who can buy poison and track and tracing who does and what they use it for. Is that difficult?
It is difficult, that's one issue. But, you know, the first bit of research we've done, which has been to look at all the recorded poisoning incidents to date, shows that in about 90% of cases, the poison that's being used is illegal. It's unlicensed. So in 90% of cases, it's not a case of someone buying something that's a licensed insecticide and using it to kill something. It's a case of someone using something that's actually a banned substance.
So where do they get it from, Martin?
So we're talking about clear, plain illegality here.
Yeah, but we're talking, I presume, lanate was the favoured one in the past.
Yes.
That has been illegal for ages. Where are they buying it from?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's one of the things that it's worth investigating, one of the things we're hoping to look at with the relevant departments, which I'm happy to say so far have really been getting on board with this effort, which is really good to see that enthusiasm. The suggestions that maybe it's coming from the occupied areas, we don't know is the honest answer. What we do know is that it's too easily available and it's being used far too freely, and the ecological impacts are quite terrifying.
Indiscriminate. We have to leave it there. We're out of time, Martin. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Our fingers are crossed for the vultures, and good luck with your work with BirdLife Cyprus.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Well, during lockdown, of course, theatres, cinemas and all sorts of other entertainment venues have been closed. The good news for culture vultures is that the Kypria Festival, an annual feast of all sorts of culture, is taking place, and it starts tomorrow. We're joined on this week's programme by the chap who does all the organising. He is Andy Bargili. Andy, nice to talk to you again, and this must have been a nightmare year for you to try and organise something at least, even if it's not maybe going to be quite as expansive as it has been in the past.
That's quite true. This year it was not just as it was any other year before, because we have to face so unforeseen circumstances due to the coronavirus pandemic. And of course we had to modify our program in such a way that we could just use productions from countries which they don't have the situation there is under control. Otherwise, it shouldn't be possible to organize the festival. So mainly we have productions from Greece, from Cyprus, but also artists from Germany, Italy and Tunisia.
Right, have you had to change what you had originally planned? Because I know from the past years when we've spoken, you start thinking about the next festival almost as soon as one is over, and I presume that you were partway through what you thought you were going to do when the pandemic hit, so you've had to change a lot of things.
Yes, this is true. This is absolutely true, because we had to exclude fantastic productions we had in mind to have this year from Spain, from the States, from UK, from Netherlands, from France, from Italy. So yes, we had to make a lot of changes.
And I presume that because the epidemiological information is changing, you must have been, particularly once we knew we had categories A, B and C, and people from category C countries couldn't come at all to Cyprus, but then we had changes, people coming from B to A and A to B and B to C. So had you actually booked some people and then you just had to say, I'm sorry, we don't know if you'll be able to come, I need to replace you?
Yes. This happened with a production from Malta, which Malta was originally in category A, but suddenly they have been dropped in category C, so we had to cancel their tour to Cyprus. Just 3 weeks ago, we couldn't make it because otherwise they should stay in quarantine for 14 days. That was not possible at all.
So you've got a lot of things happening. We'll go through the programme in a minute, but are you still sure that with Saturday looming, the programme you have at the moment will go ahead?
Well, this is what we are hoping for. Having this final program that has limited danger to be cancelled, we are very, very optimistic about having no other problems ahead. So we are starting on Saturday, tomorrow, with La Selva Matrona. This is a co-production of the festival with the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra, and the conductor is Jens Georg Bachmann, and our director is Lev Pugliese from Italy. We are just hoping that we will make a production that will entertain the audience. It's a very nice and comic scenario.
So that's the opening event, and it's taking place, I think, at the Municipal Theatre tomorrow.
Nicosia Municipal Theatre at 8:30, but the audience should come 45 minutes earlier wearing masks, because while they enter or they leave the theatre, they have to wear their masks and keep distance, so everybody should feel and be safe.
Right, now Andy, we've talked before about the financing of the Kypria Festival. I'm presuming that, just like with other places of entertainment, if you've got to social distance, that means your audience is what, cut in half?
Yes, exactly.
So you're going to lose a lot of money this year. Is the government covering that? Because this is partly sponsored by the cultural services.
Knowing that, we managed to have a budget that will take this loss of money. We are not going to face financial problems because it's scheduled in such a way that everything has been foreseen.
So let's talk about the other programmes coming up. You continue, I think, with something a little bit different on Sunday.
Yes, it's on Sunday at the Platea of Scalia Glanja. It's searching the sounds of nature. It's a musical journey through the sounds that you can find in nature using stones, glass, wood, vegetables, whatever you can think of. You can make music of. So this is going to be a kind of partly a workshop where the Kypria group with Lefteris Moscovias will show how they can really make music out of all these elements, and at the end it's going to be a kind of recital of the Kypria group while they will use these instruments they produce by themselves. It's very good for children.
I was going to say that is absolutely a perfect thing to get the younger members of society into your audience, because they've performed here before, I think, haven't they, Tatnaba? And everybody was just amazed at how they managed to elicit the sounds they did from, as you say, vegetables and fruit and all sorts of other things.
Whatever you can think of. They produce music and they do it in a fantastic way. It's very, very attractive, and I'm sure that children, they will enjoy it much more than we do.
Right, that's at 6:30 at Scalia Dlanja Square. That's on Sunday. Now, tell us how long this festival is going to run for. Normally it goes for a month. I don't suppose you've been able to do it quite as long this year, have you?
The festival runs until the 16th of October, and we have altogether 11 productions and 29 performances of them. So after the Searching the Sounds of Nature, we have a well-known work of Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, made specially for theatre, and it's a production coming from Greece with the well-known Philareti Komninou and Alekos Sisovidis. After that, we have the George Grasidis and Jazzologia Cyprus Big Band. They will make a show with classical compositions for jazz orchestras, some Latin pieces, modern, and even adaptations of Cypriot traditional songs. And this is starting as from the 14th of September, starting from Rialto, Limassol. And then we have another theatre play coming from Greece. It's The Woman of Patras. It's a theatrical performance of the life stories of a prostitute named Panorea from Patras. And it's a heartbreaking monologue that will offer strong emotions. And this starts on the 17th of September at Nicosia Palace Theatre. And then we have a fantastic musical exploration, I might say, named Water Song. This is Savina Yannatou with Primavera and Saloniko and the famous Tunisian singer Lamia Betiwi. It's going to be an exploration, a musical exploration by way of song, of water, of desert, life, death, fertility. It's going to be a very magic concert of music, and this starts on the 19th of September in Nicosia at the Municipal Theatre. Then we have another one, theatre production. It's coming from Greece, A Story Without Name. It's a love story of a historical politician, Ionas Dragoumis, with the author Penelope Delta. That's going back beginning of 20th century. And it's the story of this emblematic diplomat and the great writer through an imaginary life of desire, dreams, great high ideals. And it's starting on the 20th of September at the Nicosia Municipal Theatre. Just after this, we have another one, theatre play. It's a local production made by Agis Paikos. It's a French comedy, Panic Hits the Ministry. And it's a French comedy by Gianfranco and Guillaume Melanie. It's a very funny story that affords featuring love and confusion. It's a very nice French comedy, modern comedy. Then we have the concert of love songs by the composer Christos Pittas, who lives in London. It's based on Greek and Cypriot poems inspired by love, and is starting on the 26th of September in Limassol at Pattichio Dimotiko Theatro. And then another two theatre plays, one for children. The title is The Tsar with the Long Beard. It's a wonderful fairy tale which will take us to a journey in the golden kingdom of earth and the deep blue kingdom of the sea. It's based on Russian fairy tales, and it's a very rich production. It's especially for children, and the first performance is on the 3rd of October October at Batigio Δημοτικό Θέατρο in Limassol. The last one is by Aristophanes and Menander. It's an adaptation, a kind of synthesis of 5 comedies of Aristophanes and Menander, all based on the choruses composed by Michalis Christodoulidis, the famous Cypriot theater composer. And the highlights of frogs, Lysistrata, wasps, birds, and Samia are somehow woven together to create a new musical. And this is in Nicosia, the first performance on the 14th of October at the Nicosia Municipal Theatre.
Andy, I've got the Kypria.org.cy website up in front of me, which has the calendar there, because you've mentioned all the things, but in actual fact, many of the things that you've been talking about are going to be performed more than once, and I think in different venues. So perhaps people need to double check whether or not they're seeing it in Nicosia or it's coming to Limassol. You're trying to include a lot of different places in Cyprus, aren't you?
Yes. We perform mostly in Nicosia and in Limassol, but also in Larnaca and Arabipu. So anybody who wants to have more information on that has to visit our website, and they will find out all necessary info about the performances, where, and they can also buy their tickets there, because we sell only via internet or at ACS couriers.
Yeah, because I presume that the ticket numbers are limited according to the venue.
And we are not going to sell tickets at the venues because we don't want people to be so close each to other.
Kypria.org.cy is the website, and it's running from tomorrow all the way through until the 16th of October. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.